Ms. Kristalina Georgieva, thank you for taking the time here in Sharm el-Sheikh at COP27. Let me start with maybe a message that you would like to put forward, especially that this is the first COP that takes place in an Arab country.
It is very important that the COP is not only in an Arab country but on the African continent, because the African continent and actually most of the countries that are participating here from the developing world have done very little to create this problem, but are severely impacted. So raising attention to the consequences of climate change for vulnerable countries and then mobilizing for adaptation is so important, and it is great COP is here.
Let's discuss a blueprint of macroeconomic policies that the IMF has put forward in terms of decreasing global emissions by 25% by 2030. What is this policy tool of macroeconomic policies? How much do they cost, really?
First and foremost, we have to price carbon and gradually increase this price to the level necessary to create the incentive for businesses and consumers to bring down emissions. Currently, carbon price globally on average is $5 a ton. By 2030, it has to be at least $75 a ton if we want to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement. Second, we need to mobilize on much bigger scale private investment in emerging markets in developing economies. For this to happen, we need good data, and the IMF is working on that. We need taxonomies that create comparability for investors from advanced economies all the way to the poorest countries. And we need de-risking schemes. At the IMF, we created a new instrument, the Resilience and Sustainability Trust, to finance this long-term structural transformation. So we are part of the financing, but we want to use this instrument primarily to bring down perceived and real risk for private investments to move to emerging markets and developing economies. And last but not least, what we need is very massive education campaign, because if people are overtaken by current difficulties and they are not mindful of climate change being an existential risk to humanity, they would be slow to do their part for the transformation. Let me say this: we can survive recession. It is hard, but we can survive it. We can survive inflation. What we cannot survive as humanity is unmitigated climate crisis.
Ms. Kristalina, you've mentioned private capital, which is instrumental in the move towards net zero. Last year in Glasgow, there was the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. $130 trillion of assets under management, but it seems that this alliance is fraying a little bit without a real commitment. Is there a way in COP27 to actually come out with a mechanism to deploy these AUMs?
Yes, there are two things that can be done during COP. The first one is to lift up attention to project preparation and make access to project preparation funds easy also for private investors that are looking for opportunities in the developing world. And two, to provide platforms on a country basis for everybody, the public sector, multilateral development banks, and the private sector, to come together and seize opportunities that exist. But let me say this, we do have some good news to celebrate here, and it is the emergence of significant financing through climate-related bonds. That is now clearly a trend, positive trend. Last year we had 252 billion. Only a couple of years ago, we counted them in the tens of billions, not in the hundreds of billions. So we have to also celebrate where progress is made. Ask, how did it do it? And how we can do even more of it and replicate it elsewhere.
Let's discuss a new idea, maybe not so new, that is being tabled before actually COP27. Instead of just talking about loss and damage, where some industrialized countries do not want to take responsibility, some emerging countries and lower income countries are saying, how about we go for debt forgiveness and swap that with nature conservation, like Colombia is talking. Forgive parts of our debt and we will conserve and resurrect the Amazon. What do you think of this?
I am on record saying that we have two major problems. One is climate impact, the other one is a mountain of debt on the shoulders of poor nations. And it is important to seek ways to bring a solution to these two problems that connects them. And at the IMF we are reviewing what are the conditions for success for climate swaps. What we have concluded is twofold. One, there are ways in which good data for emission reductions can create a predictable revenue stream for countries and be used to service their debt. Two, there has to be a credible way to certify the emission reduction on one side, and then what it means for those that are forgiving the debt, in other words, who are receiving the credits. And this is part of the big discussion on carbon offsets that is taking place here. If we want countries to credibly link ecological conservation and climate action to a financial flow, then we have to have, again, good data, standardize it, and then make it a part of the solution for the climate crisis. From the IMF side, we are going to engage on this. I want to caution that if there is a massive problem that requires debt restructuring, that may not be a good candidate for this predictable long-term flow. But if we are talking about debt service over time, not debt restructuring at the moment, yes, we can link carbon credits generated by a country to debt service obligations in a way that helps solve two problems at once.
We are here, of course, in Egypt, and we are expecting maybe next month the finalization from the IMF's board for the $3 billion loan to Egypt. This is supposed to unlock about $9 billion in total. Is this a done deal, the $9 billion? And who are the other institutions and parties to those $9 billion?
Let me first express my respect for Egypt, a country that has done a lot to reform and unfortunately is being hit by exogenous shocks by COVID and then by the impact of the war in Ukraine, even harder than many other countries. We are here where normally there would be Russian and Ukrainian tourists. They're missing. And of course we know that food security for Egypt has become a serious problem. So in that context, we are engaging with Egypt to support the country to continue on this course of reforms. Yes, we have secured the commitments to $9 billion, which we believe is the size of financing gap to be filled from the World Bank, from the Gulf countries. So when it comes December, we go to our board. This $9 billion package is real. It is already in place. and it will support Egypt at a critical time.
And finally, Ms. Kristalina, in terms of other loans in the Arab region, we know aside from Egypt, there's Tunisia and maybe Lebanon.
Yes.
Any other countries requesting assistance?
At this point, I'm very pleased that we also have staff level agreement with Tunisia. Again, a country that is going through a difficult time. We have a staff level agreement with Lebanon. In Lebanon, the situation is much more difficult because of domestic political constraints. We are looking at the membership in this part of the world. One country in the Arab world I'm particularly worried about is Yemen. We have not had much of engagement with Yemen, but now that there is a notion towards stability in the country, political stability in the country, we will, of course, engage and see whether we can be a part of the support that the Yemeni people so badly need. And of course, we are there for our membership. Any country that feels the pressure of the worsening economic outlook is welcome to seek the support of the fund. And let me say this, people usually think of fund support through programs, but the most important thing we do for the membership is policy support, giving them clear projection as to what is to be coming and what are the right policies to tackle the problems of today and tomorrow. Right now, number one problem, inflation. And we zero in on how inflation can be brought down because price stability is critical for growth. It is critical especially for poor people for whom inflation is unfair tax.
Absolutely. Ms. Kristalina Georgieva, thank you very much for taking the time and best of luck here in COP27.
Thank you.